You probably thought I was a waveform, didn't you? Well, I'm not. And besides, the only waveforms that you should be worried about are the ones that are comprising the listening material of the up-and-coming album To Win What We Yearn For. Those returning to the channel, welcome back. Those new to the channel, welcome. And I hope you stick around. I am Team Real New, otherwise known as Jon Eldridge II, and today I am here to talk about the up-and-coming album To Win What We Yearn For with the person who wrote it, Jon Eldridge II, otherwise known as Team Real New. How you doing there, John?
Oh yeah, I'm great. Yeah, it's great to be here. Yeah.
It's good to hear. It's good to hear, especially since what we're doing today is a little bit unorthodox. Some may think of it as strange or cringeworthy or why would you do this to yourself? But why don't we talk about how you feel about it?
I feel real good about it. You know what I mean? My mom told me once that if I don't advocate for myself, no one's going to. And so here it is, the ultimate act of self-advocation. I am interviewing myself for this record. And while I'm doing so, I'm going to be playing Monster Hunter World. Yeah, you want to see that gameplay, don't you? Yeah, you do. Well, it's not going to be happening here. I don't know. Maybe I'll start streaming at some point. Maybe not. Go watch the web show. I don't care. I do care.
Lovely. Feel about ready to get started?
Well, yeah, I mean, let's get into it.
So the first couple of tracks on the album, I understand, fit together, right? And the title of it, Prelude / The Sunshine Steady Grows, which, as I say it out loud, sounds a little familiar to me. No? It's an interesting title. Can you tell us about it? The name of the song, the composition of it, really whatever you want to talk about.
So, I mean, as long as I've been making music for, I like to tie projects together. I like to tie my older projects, my newer projects, into the older projects that I've done. And that's something that's kind of carried over across like everything that I've ever written. Most of the new things that I have a little snippet of something old somewhere in them. And this is no exception. The Sunshine Steady Grows, which is, you know, the mostly improvised intro that I did, which then goes into this sort of mini groove vamp situation. The name The Sunshine Steady Grows actually comes from, for those of you who are familiar with Project The Real New, it actually comes from the lyrics on the first song on that album, The Way It Was, right? In the lyrics of that song, in the chorus, there's a part that goes, "And the sunshine steady grows, oh the woes we unknowingly had chose." And I took the name from there. I took the theme from there. That theme in many ways has sort of become the theme song of Team Real New on the whole, right? The name Team Real New was something that I came up with for the web show, and I ended up using a slowed down version of The Way It Was for the theme song for the web show, right? So you can kind of see how all of that ties together. And I'm using it as the opening here for the album because, I mean, it has sort of become the theme song for what I'm trying to cultivate here.
You've talked about how you like to fit your different musical projects together. Is that just, you know, an Easter egg fun factor kind of thing? Or is there a deeper reason to it?
Well, I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of explanations I could give for that. I like continuity. I like to have a continuous thread through things, which is why a lot of the music that I write for myself, by myself, is very thematic and like concept album-y in nature, because I like to tell a story with what I'm doing. As long as I've been like consuming media, science fiction and fantasy have been things that I've really enjoyed. When you take a look at a lot of that stuff, even when it's not the thing that's being focused on, there's always some kind of narrative being built, even while the smaller stories are happening. And I've always really liked that setup. So I like to carry that over into my music.
Okay, so that's the intro. Let's talk a little bit about the prelude itself. For the viewers at home, what can you tell us about this one?
So the idea behind a prelude in classical music, right, is that you are setting the stage for what's to come. And you might be doing that literally in terms of interpreting themes, or you might just be doing that in terms of setting the mood. The prelude here is a little bit of both. There are some themes that I lay down in it that come back later in the album, so keep an ear out for that if that's the kind of thing that you're into. But also, it's just sort of meant to set the mood. I got really into rock and hip hop over the past few years, and I wanted this album to represent not just what I had learned in jazz, but also what I had come to appreciate in those arenas, and this song is a little bit more rock leaning. And you might notice that written into the drum solo is an interpretation of the main theme, because again, this being the prelude, it is still part of the opening of the album and the establishment of what this album is supposed to be. And that's a big part of it, that theme.
So you mentioned the rock aspect that you were gunning for with this song, but at times it veers off into wilder territory, even, some avant-garde sounds, some might say. Was that part of the conceptual process that you envisioned for this song?
Yeah, so in grad school, I was exposed to a lot of sorts of jazz that I had not been made aware of beforehand. Funny enough, I came into the music on fusion. That was like the first jazz that I really sat down and listened to. My grandfather was and is big into Duke Ellington, so I grew up hearing those kind of sounds, like the 30s and 40s stuff. But the music that I heard that really made me want to really sink my teeth in was fusion. And then once I started listening to that, people were like, well, yeah, this is cool, but this isn't really like the foundation of the music. So people gave me some things that were a little closer to the foundation. Thelonious Monk, Ahmad Jamal, some of which I've got back here on the shelf. And my undergraduate education was mostly, in terms of jazz, it was mostly about trying to give myself a foundation there. And then once I did, I branched into other things. But yeah, grad school exposed me to a lot of new sounds, and one of the most interesting ones that I heard was the avant-garde, which I've talked about on my YouTube channel a little bit here and there before. But yeah, that was one of the big ones. My good friend that's on this album, actually, Jacob Pembleton, he was a big part in my gaining and understanding and appreciation of the music and what it was. I ended up doing a lot of research on it on my own and getting really into Sun Ra, Art Ensemble of Chicago, and all that good stuff. A lot of those guys, what they were talking about with that music was not like this deliberate weirdness or anything like that you might think, but a lot of them were really trying to get back to what they felt was the root of black music, right? Or what is the root of black music, being traditional West African music, which over the past couple of years, I've actually spent a lot of time with. So a lot of that music, is very freewheeling. The tempo will freely fluctuate or freely speed up and slow down. The point of the avant-garde for a lot of those guys was to get back to that kind of freedom of expression, that kind of purity of sound. When you listen to a lot of that music, there is actual audible screaming. And it's not like an effect or anything, it's just the expulsion of joyous sound from the human body. I got really interested in that idea, that purity of expression. A little bit of chaos in art is a good thing, I feel like. If everything is, carefully crafted and preordained and everything, and it starts to kind of sound like a computer a little bit, and I think that part of what makes live music, human-made music cool is the impurity of it, you know what I mean? The mistakes.
So if I understand it correctly, you conceive of making mistakes as being important to the human element in music?
It's kind of all tied together for me. In doing this album, I made a commitment that I really wanted to let it be what it was going to be, mistakes and all, as a sort of capstone of that period of time in my life, and just as a pure expression of what we as a group were capable of. And, I'm proud that we did it that way. So the name for this one should actually be pretty familiar to any Metal Gear Solid fans. If you've played Metal Gear, then you've probably either heard of Outer Heaven or experienced it. It's the very first location that you go to in the very first game of the series. Metal Gear Solid was, or well, Metal Gear as it was originally, was the franchise that is generally credited with the creation of the stealth genre in video games. Metal Gear is not my favorite franchise in gaming. You might ask yourself, like, if it's not your favorite franchise, why on earth did you name a song on your album after one of the games? But it wasn't necessarily so much about the game as just what it represented. I love video games, right? I mean, I'm sitting here playing Monster Hunter World as we're talking. I love video games. I always have. They've always been a big inspirational thing in my creative output. In the stories they tell, in the imagination employed in the medium, the challenge. Games are cool in a lot of ways, but one of the ways that they're coolest is that because you take such a direct part in the action, they form such a strong impression in your brain. To the point where, you know, all the stages of life that I've been through, a lot of the things that I've gone through, I sort of mark periods of time in my life by what I was playing at the time. And the Metal Gear series to me is representative of a few things. I'll give the briefest of prefaces here. I played a lot of Smash Bros. Brawl growing up. Solid Snake was introduced to the Smash Bros. Franchise in that game. He had his own part in the story, you know, where he was this commando. And it was this really interesting, mysterious thing to me at the time because I'd never played any of the games. And, you know, here's this guy from this M-rated franchise who's suddenly in a Nintendo game. And that was really interesting to me. All I had to go off of with the games for a long time was the music. And it was all this really cool, like, moody, brooding stuff that sounded like what Metal Gear was. Like, then when I got to college, I played through Metal Gear for myself. I experienced all the games for myself. Metal Gear is a representation of a larger movement that I sort of went through once I reached adulthood, where I took it upon myself to catch up on all the various things that I had missed out on growing up because I wasn't, you know, old enough to experience them at the time. I did the same thing with God of War, with BioShock, but, you know, Metal Gear was kind of special because since I had had so much exposure to the franchise beforehand, coming into a place of knowledge with it was a little more special to me. And so it sort of represents that as well. This quest for first-hand knowledge that would become really important to me in my adult life. That's a lot of what was cool about going to school for me, was getting that first-hand knowledge on all these things. So musically, Outer Heaven's Spotlight is a blues. It's a fast minor blues, which means that the writing here, unlike the prelude, the writing here is not so much the focus. A blues is a blues, you know what I mean? There are some people, like Kenny Garrett, for example, who can take a blues and like really make it their own. But this isn't really that. This is a lot more about the solos than it is about the composition. And I think that's fine. For an album that was more about making live music with my friends than, you know, necessarily it was about super complex compositions, then I think it's fitting, you know? So of all the songs on the album, this one, Moving Day, is actually the one I've heard the most buzz about. Any reason why, in your professional opinion? So everybody who's heard music off of this album is almost unanimously agreed on one thing. That one thing being that Moving Day is their favorite song on the album. And I think that's just because, I don't know. I mean, I guess the composition of it is kind of interesting. I mean, it's in 5, there's a cool little vamp at the end, there's a time signature change, you know. I guess it's one of the more colorful compositions on the record. So some people, especially musicians, they might consider that kind of writing a little gimmicky, right? Especially in the, you know, correct me if I'm wrong, the 50s hard bop kind of vibe that you're going for here. You weren't worried about that when you were writing it? Well, here's the thing about like odd meters. And when people say odd meter, they can mean two things, right? They can mean a meter that is literally not even in its time, or they can mean a meter that they find strange. And the latter meaning I'm not really a big fan of, especially since odd meters are only odd in that way. They're only strange to us, you know. A lot of jazz musicians get really into studying Indian talas, you know, which are like rhythmic cells by which music gets made over there. And that stuff comes in lots of numbers that we wouldn't even really usually conceive of music being in over here. I say that to say that if you hear something, then that's what you should write. I don't think that there's any point in being worried about conventions or simplicity. Now, if you're writing something to be simple, if you're writing it to be poppy or whatever, then yeah, you're gonna want to take that into consideration. But if you should write what you hear, because if you write what you hear, even if it's kind of strange or there's a lot going on, then people are going to still be able to identify with it. Case in point, this song, you know. Again, there's a lot going on with this song, but it still ended up being a lot of people's favorite song.
So the title Moving Day is, for me at least, and I'm guessing for many viewers at home who have also had the experience of moving several times, is a very evocative one. And I'm guessing that the images that title evokes were part of the compositional process.
So if you know me like well at all, then you know that I've done a lot of moving in my life. You know that I've lived in a lot of different places. That has definitely impacted me as a person, right? My personality might not be super different if I had grown up in one place, but the way that I present myself probably would be. But yeah, moving day is supposed to represent a lot of things, just as moving days in real life represent a lot of things for me. Sometimes moving was fun. Sometimes it was scary. Sometimes I was excited. A couple of times I was really sad. I didn't want to move. But it's always interesting, and I've never moved to another place and not felt something about it. So this song is about all those feelings: the anxiety, the anticipation, the excitement, the happiness, sometimes the sadness. And that's kind of why this song goes so many places, because it's about all that stuff.
So I'd imagine you probably get a lot of questions about the title of this one.
So the name Code 8 on 8, you know, that draws some people's attention. The name for this one is actually relatively simple. So I mentioned that I got into two genres over the past few years, right? Rock and hip hop. And this song is supposed to represent the more mellow, laid-back hip-hop aspect of things. There are two parts to Code 8 on 8, right? There's the A-side and the B-side. The A-side is more of a like electric funk kind of thing, and then the B-side is straight up hip-hop, right? But the name of the song is very, very simple. I credit two places mainly with a lot of who I am today, right? Philadelphia and Atlanta. I credit those two places with sort of making me the person and the musician that I am. Iowa as well, but you know, this song was written in Iowa, right? So it's actually very simple. Area code for Philadelphia, 215. Area code for Atlanta, 404. You add the digits up in both of those numbers, you get 8 for both of them. And I was like, that's a fun coincidence. And I knew the name had to be something about that coincidence. So yeah, hence the name 8 on 8. It's supposed to be a representation of my time in Philadelphia and Atlanta, making me into the musician that I am, and just, you know, giving me a better appreciation for the culture, right? Black culture in general.
So listening to this song a little bit, I noticed that similar to Moving Day, this one has sort of an uneven keel about it.
So yeah, this is another one that's written in an odd meter. And again, no gimmicks. It's, you know, I'm just writing what I hear. Actually, funny enough, the fact that this one was written in an odd meter did actually cause a little bit of consternation on my part. Because since it was, you know, grad season and everybody was getting everything ready, it was tough for me to get rehearsals together for the music before the recording session. We had one rehearsal to go. I think it was like a few days before we went into the studio to record. And our tenor player hadn't been able to make any of the rehearsals prior to that point. So I was kind of freaking out. I was like, good Lord, this song is in 7. We only have one rehearsal to get this right and have it be together as a sextet. Oh my God, what are we going to do? And he came in and he nailed it in one rehearsal. And I just thought that was miraculous. I guess I was worried for nothing. Let that be a lesson to you. You write what you hear.
So the vibe of the song wasn't just an excuse to get an actual Rhodes under your fingers.
Yeah, no, playing in the actual Rhodes was a neat experience. I have to look into this, but I'm pretty sure they don't make Rhodes anymore, which sucks because, I mean, who wouldn't buy one if they started making them again? But yeah, the touch on a Rhodes is different. The action on there is unique. The sound, you can replicate the sound of a Rhodes, but it just won't be the same, you know? So check these couple of tracks out because I pulled out a Rhodes for 'em. Also check them out because they're on the album and we all worked hard on them.
So what can you tell us about the B-side of Code 8 on 8?
So the B-side was an interesting thing, right? I knew that I wanted some form of hip-hop on the album. I didn't know what form I wanted it to take, though. I had a general idea for the instrumental I wanted to lay down. I had always had in mind that I wanted to sort of combine the elements I was used to working with. I wanted to do live instrumentation, live recording, and everything, but I also wanted it to be a thing where I put some effects on certain tracks after the fact, you know. The vocals you hear on the A side, those are overdubs. Some of my vocals later in the album are overdubs. And a lot of what you hear on the B side are effects and things that I produced after the fact. Sent that to my boy Tristan. He recorded his verse, sent it back to me, and then I finished up the tune. And so it gives it kind of a different flavor than a lot of other stuff on the album, but to me, different flavors are what make music cool, you know? I didn't want to do a one-note album, there's nothing wrong with them, but just me personally, as who I am and what I like to write, I don't want to do that. So, I didn't.
So in the past, you've mentioned that hip-hop was a bit of a shaky thing for you, right? Not that you didn't think it was good, just that you weren't able to get into it, you didn't feel like you could properly appreciate it. What changed with that?
Yeah, my journey into hip-hop was a tumultuous one, and it wasn't really anybody's fault, it just kind of was what it was. I had some not great experiences being the new kid a few times when I moved, and because of my association with those experiences and rap and hip-hop in general, I just had a mental block on the music for the longest time. But actually, you know, shout out to my professors, Dr. Damani Phillips, Dr. William Mennerfield. The two of them, you know, they were actually a big part in helping me to break that mental block. Because doing some of the stuff I did with Dr. Phillips, you know, when I was in grad school in Iowa, really helped me break that seal between jazz and hip-hop and realize that those two things, you know, like Q-Tip talks about, right? Those two things are not that far removed. And once I realized that and I got into, you know, A Tribe Called Quest, I got into Kendrick Lamar, you know, I got into Biggie Smalls and Nas and a few of these other folks. And it was between that, the time I spent in the Latin Jazz Ensemble there in Iowa, the research that I did about the avant-garde and what those guys were all about, like I talked about earlier, I realized like all this music, all this black music, it's all very closely tied together. It's all integrated. We put these boundaries on it so that it's more easily marketable, right? So that it's more easily definable, but it's all very closely intertwined. And that is another big thing that this record is about. To the point where originally I was going to call the record It's All of Us, you know? As like a double thing. I was going to call it that because A, it was a project I was doing with my really good friends that I had learned a ton from, right? And then it was also supposed to be just about the oneness of all these different types of black music, which is also why the album sort of dances through all these different colors and things and different styles and stuff. So this is another popular one, actually, that's gotten some play outside the record, right? And I hear that you yourself are pretty fond of this one. Care to talk about that? It Ain't Never Done is Jake, the bassist. This one is his favorite. And it makes sense as to why. It is definitely the simplest thing on the album. It was the thing that I conceived deliberately to be simple. I wanted it to be almost understated in how little is actually going on in it. The inspiration for this one was gospel, mainly. Gospel and R&B. The melody for this one I actually had written for as part of a commission that I was doing like the year before I wrote the album. But I ended up liking the melody so much that I decided to keep it and turn it into this. The title, It Ain't Never Done, that's probably my favorite title on the album. I don't know if it's my favorite song, but it's my favorite title because you just hear it and you don't even really need any more explanation. You know, everybody has had a moment in their life, or two or several, where they feel like that. It just ain't never done. It ain't never done. There's always something tiring you out. There's always something you gotta do, something you gotta worry about. You come home after a long day and you sit down, you're exhausted, and all you can do is think about how long the next day is gonna be. So I figured it was a very relatable title, very relatable song. I wanted to make it laid back like that because it's not necessarily supposed to be a sad song. It's not even necessarily supposed to be a song about being tired. It's supposed to be a musical exhale. That's a good way to put it. Just, you know, So I'm told that this is the only song on the record that you did actual live in-studio vocals for. What's the scoop on how this song came into existence? All in Your Little Head is kind of interesting because the song, which is like a straight up Delta blues kind of thing, like a B.B. King kind of blues, I didn't go with jazz changes here. I went with like the straight up, like the old school blues changes. But yeah, the composition of the song does not match the subject matter. The subject matter is about me hallucinating growing up. Let me make sure I heard you right. Full-on waking hallucinations? Because of the internet now and people sharing their experiences, we've got a much deeper understanding of sleep paralysis and what that is. I think this is the first time I've stated this in a public forum, but yeah, I had some fairly bad hallucinations while I was growing up, and as I got older, they got worse for a while, and then one night they just stopped completely. What would I see? I would see all kinds of things. Eyeballs, tentacles, people hiding behind doors, people hiding in the hallway, aliens, closet transformed into a giant mouth one time, stuff like that. And yes, some of it was sleep paralysis, some of it definitely was that, but also some of it was just I would be fully awake and I would, see things while I was lying there trying to go to sleep, or while I was trying to do anything, I mean, it's a lot better now, but that's what this song is about. That's the subject matter, A blues is supposed to be about your personal issues, so I tried to channel that for this. I understand. And believe it or not, I've actually had very similar experiences. So, moving on to some lighter things. I understand that you actually did some live vocals in the studio for this song. I'm not much of a singer. The vocals that I do in a lot of other things are better, but that's because I had the chance to do multiple takes. This that you're hearing here is the live take that I did while we were playing, so I wasn't really thinking about it too much. Yeah, I'm not the greatest singer, but too bad. You're gonna listen to it, and that's gonna be what it is, so yeah. So La Bata Cubana versus the World. I wrote this song really as a tribute, La Bata Cubana, meaning the Cuban dancer. I wrote the song as a tribute to my grandma, basically, who was a big part of me pursuing music, wanting to pursue music. And she passed in 2012 of cancer, and it was really tough for me. It was the first time that I had ever lost somebody that I was that close to, and it was kind of this big switch in my mindset. It was kind of it was a moment. It was a moment. It definitely was. As all of you, I'm sure, the first time you lost somebody that was really important to you, you know that the first time is really difficult. It's always hard to lose someone you care about. But the first time, when you really, because you never know what it feels like to lose somebody that you care about until it happens, And it's not something you can prepare for. It's not something that you can, bolster yourself against. It just happens and it sucks, and you try to move on from it and honor their memory as best you can. And that's what I've been trying to do, right? Even though I wrote this song in tribute to my grandmother was not Cuban, right? The Cuban dancer in the title is just sort of supposed to represent the mental image I had of the protagonist that I wrote the song about. A young woman, brave, beautiful, whatever. I don't know. Think Encanto, maybe. I haven't seen it, but maybe think that. And she's just, she's taking on the world. Whatever that means in this situation, maybe it's some giant kaiju. Let's go with that. I like kaiju, so let's go with that. Let's say it's her and the kaiju, and they're duking it out. And that's what it is. So you mentioned that you were in the Latin jazz ensemble when you were in grad school in Iowa. How'd your being in that and what you learned there impact something that was explicitly meant to evoke Latin music like this? I learned so much. I learned a lot of stuff in Iowa, but some of my favorite stuff that I learned was Latin jazz. Shout out to Jim Dreyer, who had spent all this time in South America becoming like a master at music, learning everything that there was to learn about claves and mambos and Caribbean styles and Brazilian styles and Cuban styles. And the Cuban stuff was the stuff that I took to the hardest, because that's the stuff where the pianist has the most interesting role, the most rhythmic role. That was the stuff that I sort of based this song off of. It was conceived as a fusion between Cuban music, hip-hop, New Jack Swing type stuff, and rock. So you can decide for yourself how well that fusion comes off, but that's what it was conceived as. And again, this is another one where things get a little more bombastic, a little crazier, because we enjoyed playing with each other, And again, like I mentioned, the freewheeling, the avant-garde thing, I think that should come out of enjoyment of music. That should come out of your happiness and your excitement about what you're doing. I know I was excited to make music with those guys. I was so sad to not be able to anymore. Yeah. So circling back to something you mentioned way earlier towards the start of the interview, is the idea of all the music of the black diaspora being this thing that fits together, that isn't really stratified like a lot of us think it is. And I know it's something that you talk a lot about, something that you feel very strongly about. So how does Latin music factor into your conception of the universal oneness of black music? It does factor in, correct?
Yeah, oh yeah, absolutely it does. Absolutely it does. Like, especially when you get into what is often termed Afro-Cuban, that stuff is coming, directly out of Africa. Those sounds, they couldn't be more closely related. They really couldn't. So yeah, absolutely, those, Latin styles of music, especially like the calypso and the samba and all of that stuff is just as much a part of the black musical diaspora as anything. So yeah, it has a place on this record too, and it's gonna have a place on the next one. Okay, so Cellos, I wanna make sure that I explain the name of this one as best I possibly can, because it is an absolutely bizarre name. Have you ever had those moments where you remember some quote from a TV show or movie or something that you saw a while ago, and you can't remember exactly where you heard it, but it drives you crazy all day and you really wish you could remember? For me, it's a little bit easier, because the vast majority of quotes where that happens to me are coming from one of like a few places. They're either coming from Flapjack, Chowder, Brickleberry, Bob's Burgers, or The Cleveland Show. They're coming from one of those five. Or American Dad, actually, because I watched those a lot coming up.
there was a particular sequence of phonemes. I can't even call it a quote because I didn't know what the words were. I just knew a sequence of sounds that kept going through my head. It sounded vaguely like wadded in cellos, right? Wadded in cellos, wadded in cellos. And when I was doing a Flapjack rewatch a couple of years ago, I was watching the episode where Flapjack goes to school, and the teacher, she asks him like, "Oh, what is this?" And one of the girls says, "Water that's shallow, not deep." And she says it like real weird, you know. And I mean, so I named this song that because this song is sort of a mini autobiography told over the course of 10 minutes. The song is about my aspirations, my life thus far, you know, the things I want to do, the things I have done, the doubts that I have faced from both other people and myself. I named it this because, I mean, it's almost impossible for me to explain. Whenever I think about, you know, who I am, who I want to be, who I was, where I'm going with things, and I think about, you know, the way that I think and the way that I go through life, I always think about that quote, how I didn't know what it was, and how it just was in my brain the way that it was. It's kind of just emblematic of me and what I kind of think of as myself. It's very difficult to explain. I just felt like it was a good title for this song that ultimately tries to wrap up not only this record, but all of the things that I've come to appreciate thus far. There's a little bit of everything in there, right? There's some metal, there's some rock, there's some hip-hop. I wrote a rap for it. There's some kind of like pop-ish vocals, there's some improvisational stuff, some electric stuff, some acoustic stuff. There's just a sprinkling of everything in there. And the message of the song ultimately is about self-doubt and overcoming it, right? And you can look at the lyrics yourself, but that's the ultimate message of the song. And the final words on the album are, you know, love yourself and the song will tell. That's the idea, right? Be you, right? Do what you want to do. Do the things, write the music that you want to write. Do the things that you want to do. You know, there's always going to be people who want to tell you, who want to try and explain to you how they feel like you need to conduct yourself as a musician, and that is stupid. Because if everybody throughout history had listened to people who told them how they needed to conduct themselves, then we wouldn't have, 90% of the music that we have today. Probably more, you know. So just do you, you know. I'm going to. All right. Thanks so much for sitting down with me. I really appreciate the insight, and I'm sure the viewers at home do too. For those of you at home, To Win What We Yearn For is going to be up on the website. The URL's in the description below. I'll put it on the screen again here. The album's going to be up on the website this Saturday, March the 18th. Go check it out if any of this sounded interesting. Regardless, you know, thanks for watching. Share with your friends.